the Stay at Home Fest. This is the Crime Traditions panel. I've been looking forward to this one. We have a fantastic panel of writers from across the UK and Ireland, and we're going to be looking at the traditions of crime and thriller writing in our respective countries, and then seeing where we fit into that, and how much the places we grew up and our roots have influenced our writing. Now, a few practical things before we start. We're going to be on for about 45 to 50 minutes in this initial panel session, but of course, as ever, we would love to have your questions. If you would like to ask a question, then down the bottom you have the Q&A box, and that's the best place definitely to put your questions. So anytime you can pop a question in there, and we will look at all the questions at the end. So after the initial 45 minutes, we'll turn to the questions at that point. We do also have the chat box, which is totally open, and you can have conversations between yourselves. You can say hello to us, you can say hello to your friends, whatever you want. It's just a general place for chatting, so feel free to use that whenever you want. But if you do want a question, it's best to put it in the Q&A, just so that it doesn't get lost amongst all the well-wishing. I think that's pretty much all we need to say at this point. So we should be done by 8:15 or so. So let's get on and find out who we have on the panel. I will start Dan South in our most southerly, that was a terrible accent, I'm sorry. This is not starting well. With Victoria Dowd, our Southern England representative.
Oh my goodness, yes. Well, I'm originally Yorkshire, so that's not terrible. But I've been all over, so that's okay. Yeah, I think I probably represent the oldest tradition here, the kind of whodunit golden age tradition. And I think you probably want to see my book. That's probably the point for this. Smart Woman's Guide to Murder. And the second one is Body on the Island. So they're kind of traditional whodunits, but really sort of updated with a lot of dark humour and things you wouldn't expect to find in that kind of tradition.
And can we just say that today Victoria was announced as a fantastic award winner? Do you want to tell us just a wee bit about that?
Yeah, it's all been a bit of a shock, and it's a huge shock. I was the winner for fiction for the People's Book Prize for this year.
Fantastic.
Yay.
Well done. That's really, really
I've
brilliant.
just seen the trophy and it's enormous. That's brilliant. It's
Fantastic.
very much in the golden age tradition, if in a sort of Joan Collins way. So perfect.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Victoria. Sharon, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm Belfast based, so I'm representing the noirish section of the crime fiction genre. I write police procedurals at the minute, and my new book, Who Took Eden Mulligan, hasn't been out that long, from February in Ireland, and it'll be out in the UK in August. And I suppose, there's quite a lot of noir-esque type stuff going on here. But crime writing from here is quite recent as a tradition. So I'd be quite keen to talk about that later on once we get the conversation going.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Sharon. Trevor, you want to tell us a wee bit about yourself?
I will. Hi, everyone. I'm Trevor Wood, the author of the gritty crime thrillers, The Man on the Street, and the sequel out soon, One Way Street, which are both set in Newcastle's homeless community. And I'm representing Northern Noir, I guess we'll call it, which is all set in dark, shady, corrupt northern cities full of miners and people wearing flat caps. Or maybe it isn't. We'll find out later.
Very good. Thank you, Trevor. Trevor, of course, the current holder of the CWA New Blood Dagger Award, which he has to display. Excellent. Thanks, Trevor. Louise Mumford in Wales.
Hello, I am Louise Mumford and I am the author of Sleepless, which is a speculative thriller. I'm representing Wales this evening. Well, I don't know why you're laughing, Trevor. I would like to say, doing hapus in fourth which means I am happy to be here.
Louise and I did the Welsh Crime Festival last week, and I spoke something in Welsh, and she didn't, and she's Welsh rep.
I chickened out. My one was too hard, and I worried. The crime scene in Wales is up and coming at the moment. We've just done our first virtual crime fiction festival, which is very exciting. So it is a great time to be a crime fiction writer in Wales.
Fantastic. I look forward to hearing more about that, Louise. And Olivia. Oh, you're on mute, Olivia.
On mute, Olivia.
I turn myself off occasionally and I forget to turn myself back on. So yeah, my book is called The Murder Box and it's coming in July. Thank you, Trevor. Well modelled. I suppose I represent the Irish side here along with Sharon. But I live in Oxford. So I lived in the UK since I was 19. In fact, I came over to study chiropractic in Wales, and I lived there for 4 years as well in Treforest, just outside Pontypridd in Glamorgan. So I loved living there for that amount of time, and then moved to Oxford for my first job. And yeah, I'd intended to go back to Ireland, but yeah, just got stuck here and I love living in Oxford, so it's a perfect place for me. Yeah, and I guess I should tell you, I write police procedurals. The Murder Box is my 4th novel in the Frankie Sheehan series.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Olivia. I'll introduce myself now. So I'm Emma Christie, representing Scotland, in case you hadn't noticed the shirt. This is my debut novel, The Silent Daughter, and it is an Edinburgh-based novel following a news reporter trying to hunt down his missing daughter. I actually live in Barcelona, which also features in my book, but it's mainly Edinburgh based. But this novel and my next novel, Find Her First, are both based in Edinburgh, and I love writing about Scotland. So we'll be talking a wee bit more about how our roots influence our writing as we move forward. So I think a great way to start is to look at these cliches or these traditions of what does it mean to be a Scottish crime writer, an Irish crime writer, a Welsh crime writer, because there are, if we look at Scotland, everyone thinks of Tartan Noir, which I think many writers don't actually really like the phrase because it seems a wee bit twee, perhaps. And in fact, what you find in Scotland is that a lot of the crime writing is anything but twee. It tends to be very gritty, deals with big issues, redemption, the good and evil forces fighting against each other. There's also often very dark humour, but very dark. And there can also be a wee spot of violence. They're not for the light-hearted, a lot of the Scottish crime novels. And I think, all those things together, when people think of Tartan Noir, they maybe think of those qualities, even if they don't like the title Tartan Noir. And so in terms of my place within that, we'll be talking about that once we've had the other definitions. But for people who are watching, I think it would be fascinating to, as we go through the sort of this first section, when we're talking about what are the traditions, what are your ideas? If I say Tartan Noir, what do you think of? It would be interesting to see if you have a different impression of what each of these areas represent. So feel free to pop comments in the Q&A or in the comments, and we'll see what you think about these traditions. So Tartan Noir, moving from Tartan Noir to, you mentioned Belfast Noir, Sharon.
Mm-hmm. Well, I suppose that the obvious thing is that we're dealing with the inheritance of the Troubles, and really crime fiction is quite new for us. Louise was saying the same for Wales. I've lived in Wales as well, But I think that we were so fatigued by violence on our television screens every night, in our newspapers, on our streets, that we weren't ready to process that which we had lived through. So the Good Friday Agreement and the heralding of peace, an uneasy peace as it is, has meant that we are now in a position where we're able to look back and examine what we've gone through and maybe explore that within the crime fiction genre, because I think it's the best place to really work out the history of a place and where it's going. You know, but I also think it's funny that most of us here have said we've lived in other places. I think there's something really, you know, in a writer to move away and come back, or to look at your place of origin through new eyes. I think that there's a richness to be gained in that. What does everybody else think?
Completely, yeah, absolutely. And I love what you said about the working through the troubles. And, you know, from the perspective of something completely different with the whodunits in the sort of golden age, they were often, because they'd gone through such horrific times in the war and the interwar era, often people talk about, you need to work out that puzzle. You need to have a good guy at the end of the day who solves these crimes, whatever that good guy looks like, or, you know, whoever that group is.
And there's a safety, isn't there, within a crime novel, that you know you're going to be taken on this ride, this roller coaster of thrill and fear, and there might be a bit of gore in there, depending how dark it is. But at the end, there will be some sort of resolution. And that is so rewarding and comforting in a very strange way, isn't it?
That's really, really fascinating point, Sharon. And looking at that sort of, looking back on recent history, I mean, I'm living in Barcelona, and you know, here we've got the very recent history of the dictatorship and the civil war, and it's not comfortable at all. Even talking about it, to be honest, there's still that tension, and so writing about it, I can only imagine, is, you know, it's very, very challenging. But you know, as you say, this resolution that you get that doesn't always happen in real life. I mean, that's a really interesting point. Looking to one of the other new, well, very new crime traditions, Louise Mumford. Tell us what's happening in Wales.
Well, it's interesting because you're talking about the cliches. There are many cliches about Wales and about this idea as the land of song and coal and leeks and women wearing pointy black hats and shawls. And I think sometimes you often have a very idyllic picture of Wales as well. It's seen as a very rural place, which isn't actually the case, because living in South Wales, which I do, that's actually very built up and actually has some areas of real poverty as well. But I think if you're thinking of Welsh crime fiction, you're probably thinking of TV at this point. So it shows like Keeping Faith with the famous yellow raincoat, which I think then spawned a lot of book covers with yellow raincoats on them. You're thinking of the Pembrokeshire murders. So you're thinking of somebody standing on a cliff top, kind of gazing moodily out into the sea. And again, it's quite rural. So it's really exciting at this point to be part of Crime Cymru, which is a new collective of Welsh crime writers who have got together, and just reading through the different books that they've read and where they've and that they've written and where they've set them. It's such an eclectic mix, and it would be quite interesting to talk about, I don't know whether now or a bit later, because I think writing and setting your books in Wales hasn't always been seen to be very fashionable by publishing houses, especially within England. I know some crime writers in the past have been discouraged from actually setting their books in Wales. They think that that's going to put people off, maybe because of the language, though not everybody, as I've shown, not everyone speaks the language. But that's all changing now. And actually there's a real kind of pride in setting books in Wales and writing about Welsh, writing about Wales as a place.
That's fascinating that people would discourage it. You know, I suppose in the same way, you know, as a Scottish writer, I initially wrote books that were based in Latin America because I was living in Guatemala and Mexico, and my early attempts at novels were set there. And eventually my agent said, you know, they weren't selling, you know, and my agent said, you know, maybe we should try and write in Scotland, because the Scottish scene is massive. You know, people love Scottish crime and thriller books. And I always had a Scottish lead character, but based in those locations. And it was really, The Silent Daughter is the first book that I've written based in Scotland. You know, it has the benefits as well, though. It's a saturated market, the Scottish market as well. You know, it's you know, you've got these massive names. And you think, oh, you know, am I just going to be another one, you know, of the Scottish, many Scottish crime writers? So it's interesting, you know, and you're sort of the pioneer in Wales, you know, or among the pioneers of crime writing. Yeah. You are the pioneer, Louise.
Doesn't that
Brilliant.
mean you die some horrible TB-ridden death?
Eat some oranges and you'll be fine. Olivia, tell us a wee bit about the Republic of Ireland.
Yeah, so I think it's weird because this discussion in Ireland has been going on now. Well, certainly since I was published, or I was aware of it when I was published. I didn't kind of perhaps realize I was kind of joining that wave of crime fiction from Ireland. I think I've become aware of Tana French and read a few of her books. And then Jo Spain, of course, who's just so prolific and an absolute trailblazer in crime fiction. It's hard to put your finger on exactly why before a certain point there wasn't much crime fiction, because obviously it's certainly doing very well in Ireland now. Whether, as Sharon says, there wasn't an appetite for say violence in fiction or exploring darker themes because we were living it. And it's probably similar now when, you know, you get asked the question, would you ever write a lockdown novel or coronavirus? You know, I think most people's reactions are, oh, I don't know, because it's hard to kind of, when you're up against that glass, to detach yourself enough to write about it or want to immerse yourself emotionally in it further. So perhaps there's some of that with Irish crime fiction, or why it's suddenly charging ahead now. And I had looked at this in quite detail a few years ago and looked at the social changes, which I'm always massively interested in, obviously, as a crime writer, but as someone who's Irish. And I think perhaps maybe the Celtic tiger, when it was roaring all those years ago, was responsible for people who wouldn't have taken up the pen to take up the pen. Prior to that, the vision of literature in Ireland was very much that literary club, and it might have felt exclusive to some extent. I'm not saying it was, but it might have felt to certain people that it wasn't for them. And I think when Ireland had those years of kind of moneyed years, if you like, or possibility, I mean, I remember, I just moved to Wales at the time, but I remember the shift in attitude, and it was really anything is possible, we can go get it. You know, there was this huge pride in the nation that we were now running among the big guys, and, you know, and that kind of possibility trickled down, I think, and certainly much more women who might have just stuck in their role were, you know, or stayed in their lane, so to speak, decided, you know what, I'm going to give this a go, or anything's possible. I'm going to apply for that university degree or that top job. And I think for me personally, there were a lot more women and people just generally picking up the pen and attempting to write that novel that they wanted to write. So perhaps that's why it's so varied. So it's not just about the troubles. There's a huge breadth in Irish crime fiction so quickly. You know, it hasn't just kind of come down the usual classic trail. It is just immediately opened out to thrillers like The Chain with Adrian McKinty, and obviously his Sean Duffy series in Northern Ireland. Jo Spain has her police procedural and her standalones, which are thrillers. And Catherine Ryan Howard, who is quickly becoming a kind of queen of high concept as they've given her that name, and Jane Casey and Liz Nugent. So it's and many more, and Steve Cavanagh and Brian McGillivray as well. So just a massively expansive list of crime fiction which from Ireland at the minute, which is hugely exciting, and just delighted to be part of it, really.
That's so fascinating.
Sorry, that went on a bit.
No, but it's fascinating how it, you know, it's gone in parallel, because I thought, you know, those boom years, I thought, I wonder how that has influenced writing, but it seems like it's complete parallel. It's just kind of suddenly given that confidence.
It's my theory, Emma. It's my theory, because I just remember feeling that myself, that energy of you're kind of coming out of the 80s, 90s and feeling like, gosh, you can do what everyone else is doing in the world. We don't have to just kind of stay small in our lives. So yeah.
So no, I find it fascinating. And looking now at Victoria, tell us a bit about, you're the is it cozy crime? Is that how you would?
Some of it is, and there are a lot of people here. There's a huge crossover, I think, like with every other genre. There's huge crossovers within it as well. And I think, like Olivia was saying, this was completely the opposite sort of genre for me, in that, in the south of England, in the sort of Devon, Cornwall area, you have this huge tradition of Agatha Christie novels, the whodunit, and it was seen for a very long time as though it had had its day in the sun. That's over. It's not fashionable. It's not cool. It's not literary at all. So completely the opposite to what Olivia was saying about that. Her area was very much seen as very literary, and to break out of that and to do, more mainstream stuff. There's not a huge tradition of anything very literary in the sort of classic whodunit, the golden age of detection, until very, very recently. So when I started writing The Smart Woman's Guide to Murder, there were a lot of people who said, no, this is very unfashionable. Nobody wants this kind of crime anymore. And I suppose to an extent, cozy mysteries has a bit of a bad label. I don't mind any label, really. I'll take anything I can get. But, it's seen as that's from another era. This is, that has nothing to do with our world now. But actually, if you pull it apart and look at the rules, the way it works, and the puzzle of it all, it works now. And it only needs a small amount of tweaking to fit into our lives and to be extremely relevant still. So you take, for instance, the recent adaptations that you get from people like Sarah Phelps of an Agatha Christie novel, like And Then There Were None. It's frightening. And people can't watch it because they're just they're gripped, but they're really, really scared. So there is that feeling of fear within them. And you do get that almost gritty, but it's very much beneath the surface. So you've got this beautiful veneer of there's a cocktail party, but they're quite willing to step over the body that's in the middle of the room and say, who do we think did this? And has everybody got a drink before we continue? Is that okay? And it's that strange veneer and a real kind of juxtaposition that I think has found its day again. There are people, writing in this area now. Martin Edwards and the Mortmain Hall stuff is absolutely beautifully written. It's got a darkness to it that I don't think was so prevalent in the golden age, but it's got all those tropes that are there as well, and Peter Swanson, and and then you get people who take it a step further with sort of Stuart Turton, who goes into the 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, and he occupies the body of each person in the house during that period of time. And so you even have that kind of supernatural element that was always present during that sort of time. So I think, it's completely the opposite to a lot of what's happened in crime fiction elsewhere, that it had this huge boom era and is now massively stuffed over there as being unfashionable and not cool, but actually is starting to resurge a little bit, I think.
Definitely. You see a lot, the Sarah Pearse novel, The Sanatorium. It's again sort of country house. You've got The Chalet by Catherine Cooper, who's a Sunday Times bestseller. These are all sort of similar types of novels, I think, and it's amazing how it's totally come back. And then you've got Sophie Hannah writing with the Agatha Christie family, as well, and creating these new novels. It's definitely absolutely come back into fashion. And I think, I wonder, if was it Lucy Foley that wrote one based
The
in
guest
Scotland.
house, yeah.
Is that based in Scotland, that one?
Yeah, there's the hunting
Party.
and the guest house, and you know they've all got those tropes there, you know.
Well,
And
Murder Box is based on that whole idea. So the novel that in fact, we've got a fish called Agatha in it, Victoria.
I love that, a fish called Agatha. Oh, that's fantastic.
So the whole premise is based around the traditional murder mystery. And my detective Frankie receives a box on her birthday, which he believes to be a murder mystery game.
Fantastic.
And she doesn't pay it much heed until a woman presents to her offices and starts describing her missing friend who bears some resemblance to the murder victim described in the game. So I made sure that I gave a nod to all of the usual murder mystery tropes. I just wanted to bring that traditional old-fashioned whodunit and put it over a really modern police procedural, or in that way, and to see if I could do it. So it's certainly on the rise, as you say. Hopefully, anyway. I hope it is.
Yeah. I love the title you have as well, The Murder Box. That's just, that's fantastic. I love.
Sorry to interrupt. I had to burst in with that.
No, I love that. I love the title, and I love that. I think actually, when you look at most crime fiction, it does have a whodunit aspect to it. And you know, even if you look at really gritty stuff that's happening, such as Unforgotten, you know, they're digging up a body and going, where is this from? There is that puzzle aspect to it. So it all has a bit of a nod towards the golden age. But
no, it's totally fascinating, and I wonder, do you know, I mean, obviously that some of these books are set in Scotland or would be set in other parts of the country. Oh, I haven't talked to Trevor actually. Would you ever see a cozy crime in Newcastle?
Coming up there to cozy it up.
I really don't. Somehow, can I just check? I am on 10% for holding your book up, aren't I? That's right.
Yeah, definitely. There's a fiver in the post coming to you.
Okay, I'll keep doing. No, somehow I don't really see a cozy crime set in Newcastle.
Right, that's the gauntlet.
There you go. That's an idea for book 5. I mean, I was kind of half joking earlier about the kind of dark, corrupt shadiness of Northern Noir, but there is some truth in it from what we've seen, really, I think, in the past. There's a kind of uniqueness to books set in the North, because there haven't been that many in the past, mainly because, I mean, we all know that publishing's been London-centric since forever. And they kind of always thought that if you set books anywhere else other than London, nobody would want to read them. But it's kind of almost the opposite, and I think they've discovered that now. If you set books in a northern city, then you get twofold. You get readers who want to know about that city, who don't know anything about it. The number of people who've told me they've never been to Newcastle astonishes me. I mean, it's great because, you know, it's not so crowded and the beaches are empty. But people read them as almost like a tour guide book. But also it means that the locals love the books because there are so few of them. So if you write books set in Manchester, pretty much everybody who reads in Manchester goes and buys the book. So publishers have finally realised that it's a good thing, I think. So you get people like Joseph Knox setting his books in Manchester, and Amit Dand, his Bradford set books are doing fantastically well because people don't know those cities very well. So Amit can describe Bradford until the cows come home and people are going, wow, I didn't know that. I didn't know that was there. I didn't know it had amazing buildings. I mean, if anybody's been to Bradford, the Waterstones there, it's like the most spectacular bookshop you will ever see in your life. But people kind of imagine Bradford as some dark hellhole where all the pits have closed, but it's just not true. And Northern Noir is kind of introducing people to different cities across the country now, I think. But the stories do tend to be quite dark, quite gritty, generally set around some kind of corruption that's going on, which is fascinating because, you know, I've lived in Newcastle for 30 years and I haven't seen any corruption, really. I used to work for the local council and they didn't really know what they were doing. They weren't clever enough to be corrupt, to be honest. But I also think, well, Sharon was talking earlier about the kind of outsider view, about people kind of going away and then taking a fresh look at what they're writing about. And as you can hear, I'm obviously not from Newcastle. I'm legally banned from actually attempting a Geordie accent because it is really, truly terrible. But I've lived here for 30 years now, so I've kind of got an outsider's view of the city, and I see things that the people who've lived here forever don't really see or sometimes even appreciate. And I've heard similar from Mari Hannah, shares an agent with me, and she's probably the other writer who sets her books mainly in the Northeast, but she's not from here either. And she says the same thing, that everything to her is like amazing and like, wow, look at the coast, it's incredible. And look at the beautiful countryside and the buildings in Newcastle. It's got the most amazing Georgian streets you'll ever see. But people don't realise that. So we get to describe these things that the locals kind of take for granted, I think.
No, that's totally fascinating. And I think, you know, for me, writing about Scotland, you know, I always, you know, I said I initially wrote books that were based in Guatemala and Mexico. And when my agent said, how about trying Scotland, I thought, oh, I don't know if I want to write about Scotland. But once I started writing about it, you know, I thought, wow, I love writing about Scotland. And I think Scotland really lends itself, you know, to these atmospheric scenes. And, you know, Edinburgh especially, I mean, it's so spectacular. And because I'm not there, it was brilliant. You know, Edinburgh features in many, many novels, obviously. But, you know, for me as a writer, in terms of sort of satisfying work, I just found it great to sort of conjure up these places from, you know, a point of view of someone, again, who's sort of looking from the outside in a wee bit. You know, I often feel like I'm going to sound like Neil Diamond, but lost between two shores, because I'm a huge Neil Diamond fan. I'm sorry, it's happened. I confess, live at a festival, but I am. But, you know, so I think I see both Scotland and Spain with this freshness, which I think perhaps I wouldn't have. And I think that really helps with my writing.
In a way, helps you see Edinburgh differently too, doesn't it? You know, you're looking at it from a different perspective. Yeah,
absolutely. And you know, both you, Sharon and Olivia, you've both mentioned that. So looking at you, Sharon, you know, this distance that you've had, you know, tell us about how deep an influence that's had for you in your writing.
Massive influence, but it's been distance of time as well as place. So distance away from the troubles to be able to look back and sort of examine that. So I lived in London for 2 years when I did my postgrad, and then I moved to Cardiff for 8 years, lived in North Cardiff, Ribina and Kincoid, and had my 2 first babies there. And then I moved back to Belfast and found, even though I was coming back and forward maybe 4 times a year, when I moved back, I could see and feel the changes. And I think, Liv, what you were saying about the Celtic Tiger, I'm doing a PhD in Northern Irish crime fiction at the minute. And I'm looking at why there's been no sort of strong tradition of female crime writers up north, whereas down south, I mean, you throw a dart and you're going to hit one at the minute. Yeah. They're all doing so fantastic.
It's going to take me years to take them all out, Sharon.
And in the past as well. And in the past, you know, Agatha Christie, Marjorie Allingham, Josephine Tay, Naomi Marsh, they're all females, you know.
But we did not have that tradition up here. So I'm looking at why that is the case. And I've come to this conclusion, though my differentiation panel may tear me apart, but I think the huge societal changes that happened in the south of Ireland with the Celtic Tiger boom and bust. So there was a lot of corruption, there were the Magdalen laundry stories started coming out, the sex abuse cases against the Catholic Church. Suddenly people were talking about these darker stories. And also down south, we had a great tradition of genre writing within women's fiction. So we had Maeve Binchy, we had Marion Keyes, and it was almost, you know, wasn't too hard to step over then to the darker side when we had so much political corruption going on down there. And in the background, there was everything that was going on up in Northern Ireland. But we haven't had those huge societal changes with regards to abortion rights or gay marriage, they've all came much later for us. So I think we are only finding voice now and been able to sort of speak out. And part of growing up during the Troubles, you were told, whatever you do, say nothing, you know, don't give an opinion, don't put yourself in jeopardy, you know, don't lift your head above the parapet. And so now we can do that, but we're also looking to the past. You know, Victoria's saying about the mystery element. My book is a cold case at the heart of a present day murder scene. Oh, so I love the idea of the past sort of pressing in on the present and trying to unknot all of that. Because I think that's the way we all live. The past is always sort of there and colouring who we are, you know.
Absolutely. And you know, writing about such a sensitive topic for so many people, I mean, you know, I think all of us, you know, when your first book comes out, or when any book comes out, you know, you're really nervous, but you've got this sort of added layer of, you know, not just a bad review, but, you know, really harsh criticism potentially, you know, from politically. I mean, how do you cope with that?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I found, one of the cases in my books is Disappeared Mother, which is almost a trope in itself in Northern Irish crime fiction. And so there was a really sort of famous case here of a mother who was taken away by the IRA, killed and buried for years. And she had something like 5 children. It was just horrendous. And so you know, I was so worried about people thinking I had somehow misused that story or had taken advantage of it. But, you know, most people are seeing the book for what it is. It's really exploring how these terrible things affect those who are left behind. So, you know, I'm not setting out to tell any one story. There are many cases like that, and they've impacted me. You know, you don't grow up with all of that going on in the background without it having an effect. You know, it was a really dark place to live during my childhood, but a lot of the time, you know, you were more interested in the Dukes of the Hazzard or Starsky and Hutch than the politics out in the street, you know. So if there was a riot going on, I would not have been part of that or would have even known it was going on. I was quite sheltered by my parents, even though we lived in an area that was very working class, that, you know, had seen an awful lot of violence. There was a stretch of road quite near us called Murder Mile because so many people had been gunned down on that stretch. And, you know, you just can't grow up with that and not have it seep into your fiction then, you know. So even though my fiction might be a little bit dark, I still find that there's hope there because of where we've came from and where we are now. And I think it's the same for the south of Ireland, Olivia. You know, things were pretty dire back in the day. You know, it was like the church was in control and women specifically didn't have a voice.
I know, and it's weird because like it's weird now looking back, but you're totally right. It was like we woke up from a sleep, you know, that was just totally, it's, you know, I don't know, it's like you're so immersed in the Catholic Church being in control of everything. No one even, you don't even question it. So, and then it was just like, there was like this great awakening in Ireland where everyone just suddenly realized, yeah, you know, we don't have to live like this. We can live like other countries who are not, you know, suppressed by the church. But for me, my view when I moved to Wales, when I looked, what I kind of noticed or picked up in Ireland, when I began writing, and certainly when I'm writing my books, yeah, I don't tend to delve into that. Maybe it's still too much for me, that kind of side of Ireland and the history. It just feels, even though I write quite dark crime fiction, it almost feels a bit too, that feeling of oppression is still haunts me to some degree. So for me, it's more, I like discovering or looking at Ireland and finding little things about the history that might have been swallowed up by our other history, which is the Troubles. So there's so much that you kind of gets bypassed when you've got something massive like that going on in a country's past. So just little things that you might get overlooked. But one of them with the murder box, when I was writing that, I really wanted to kind of encompass this feeling of storytelling, and when something fictional or not quite, there's a spin being put on it. That's a story that's passed between one person to the other in Ireland. And I kind of wanted to make that a little bit bigger. And when I was researching, I discovered that there was, and I must go and see it now when we get out of, when we're allowed to do that safely. There's a plaque on O'Connell Bridge in Dublin City that tells the story of a man called Pat Noyes, who apparently died when his carriage rode over the edge of the bridge into the Liffey and he drowned. And that plaque had been put there by, I think there were two brothers, when the Millennium Clock was removed, and the council had left this kind of gap in the bridge. And obviously O'Connell Bridge is massively historic, or kind of a structure in Dublin City. So these guys in the middle of the night had inserted this kind of bronze plaque with this story of this man called Pat Noyes. And I think it was there years, I think 2 to 3 years before anyone noticed that the plaque had taken its position on the bridge, and even then nobody knew whether it was true or not. And it turned out to be a prank by these people who had put in this bronze plaque into the wall or into the bridge, and the story was completely fictional. But when the council then went to try and remove it, people in Dublin City had such a sense of belonging over the story attached to this, even though it was completely fictional, that they objected, and the plaque still stays. So anyway, just stuff like that I like discovering about Ireland, that even though I grew up there and very close to Dublin City, things like that just have bypassed me. And because of the other news, I think when you're growing up, you miss out on a lot of little things, little stories. So I like things like that. But yeah, the accent, so I have to kind of keep in touch with that side for dialogue. So I listen to RT radio. I took to listening to that every morning when I have my breakfast, so I can keep the voices around me. Yeah. You lose it otherwise, I think.
I wonder if there's a Celtic noir, that if we can see a sort of a thread running through the Scottish and the Irish and the Welsh. Has anybody ever looked at that in particular?
I don't know. Well, I was going to ask Louise actually about, I think all of us are writing crime fiction from a place of, of a long tradition. There are different traditions, but, again, as Louise mentioned at the start, there isn't that long tradition of writing crime. And there also isn't, as in Ireland, there isn't a sort of long and sort of bloody war that's been fought on your soil. And, so you're kind of starting from I don't know, I ask, are you kind of starting from scratch? I mean, or is there a hidden history of Wales and Welsh writing that we just don't hear about?
I think that there hasn't been any battles or wars. You're right. Obviously, we've been a peaceful nation for many years, and we hope to continue in that way. But I think there has been a battle to reclaim a sense of Welsh identity and language. In particular, for example, I come from the generation who were not taught any Welsh at all. That's why I'm so terrible at it. We didn't do Welsh GCSE. We had a spattering of Welsh phrases when we were in school. And it's really now that Wales is really reclaiming the language, and Welsh schools, for example, Welsh language schools are booming. So it is a really interesting thing that you said about there haven't been any battles. There might not have been physical battles, but I think there's always been a battle to try and keep the Welsh identity separate, and not just to be sucked into England in particular. People, when I say, if I go on holiday and I say I'm from Wales, a lot of people will just say, "Oh, England." It's like, no, it's a separate bit of it. So, but I think it's also exciting that if you haven't got that long kind of crime tradition, we have a huge literary tradition, obviously going back to the Mabinogion, and then all the Thomases, R.S. Thomas, Dylan Thomas. If you want to get ahead in the Welsh literary scene, change your name to Thomas. That would be a good thing to do. we've got this long literary scene, however we haven't got the crime fiction side. I think it's actually really exciting that we can, I think right now we're just kind of taking little bits of what we like and just experimenting. I mean, my book isn't a traditional crime novel because it has that speculative edge, but it is very much inspired by the Welsh landscape, because the island where the book is set, where my character goes on a sleep technology trial, is inspired by Caldy Island, which is just off the coast of Tenby, which is lovely. Has a working monk population who make perfume and chocolate. So if you want to go for a lovely day trip, and they're vaccinated now as well, so you can go for a day trip very soon. It's a really lovely place. I think we've got cozy crime. There's Kathy Ace, who's doing, I think it's called let me just check, The Case of the Dotty Dowager. That sounds like a cozy crime title to me. We've got all sorts of different things. We've got people like G.B. Williams, who's actually created a little, she's made up her own Welsh village writing about Snowdon. So it's a really hopeful time, I think, for crime fiction in Wales, and a time where we can look what's going on and see what we want to write about. Actually, I don't think we're trying very hard to not be held back by the past. You know, Wales is surrounded, it's mired in its past, the castles and all of that. But I think it's looking ahead where you actually get to make some progress then.
Have you come across John Williams's books, Louise? Do you know John Williams?
No.
He wrote, I think it's called the Cardiff Trilogy or something. He wrote some very gritty noir thrillers quite a few years ago, which were pretty influential. I've read a couple of them. They're terrific.
Oh, but yeah. And there's also there's a really brilliant surreal A Last Tango in Aberystwyth, I think.
Oh yeah, I've read that as well.
Price. Yeah, there's some brilliantly eclectic, just lovely off the wall stuff coming from Wales. You know, it is really, really exciting. I'm thinking we should be calling it Dragon Noir.
Nice. That might stick. Well, I was going to ask that actually. I mean, all of us, coming from, I think we're, little by little been kind of trying to define, what it means to be a writer and what kind of writing comes out of our own backgrounds. But do you deliberately seek out, in terms of your own reading, do you seek out books that are within this genre that you're in? Olivia, do you specifically immerse yourself in Irish crime? You're on mute. Oh.
Sorry, I just keep muting myself in case I'm making noises or something, drinking water in the background. No other noises. Trevor's just falling on his chair. I think you end up getting lots of my peers, you read their proofs, so you're kind of naturally kept abreast of what's going on in the crime fiction scene in your own kind of area. I probably read a lot of non-fiction with regards to my own work. I think one of my last book, I ended up reading a lot of books about undercover police officers and things like that. I guess I probably do read a lot, but I'm not sure I seek it out. It just kind of thankfully comes through the post to me. So we're lucky in that way. Once you're published, you do get sent a lot. I like to keep quite a broad reading habit if I can. So I just like to kind of dip into all sorts of different type of fiction if I can. So yeah. I
read Emma when I was writing The Man on the Street. My natural style is probably a bit more comedic and a bit lighter than the gritty thrillers I'm writing now. So I read pretty much everything that David Peace ever wrote. The Red Riding Quartet, which is really brutal and quite difficult to read at times, set entirely in West Yorkshire. So I devoured that to try and kind of absorb some of his style, if you like, and some of his darkness. And it rubbed off on me. And one of the reasons I mentioned John Williams just now, Louise, is that I met John Williams at Harrogate a couple of years ago. He was actually one of the judges on the main crime novel prize. And he told me he worked as an editor at Serpent's Tail. And I was like, oh, that's where David Peace started, and he's pulled him out of the slush pile. John Williams pulled David Peace's first book out of the slush pile and said, we've got to publish this, it's magnificent. So I got a load of detail about how David Peace was discovered, which was fantastic. But that was kind of, you know, the Welsh crime writer passing the baton on to a West Yorkshire crime writer. And David Peace for me is like the godfather of Northern crime. I mean, there are earlier people like Ted Lewis who are quite influential, who wrote the book that became Get Carter, the movie. But David Peace sums up brutal, dark, shady Northern noir. I'm not sure I'd recommend you read them because they're deeply upsetting and distressing. And I suffered for my art reading them, basically, but he's a fantastic writer. So if anybody wants an introduction to Northern noir, David Peace is your man.
I have to say, leading on from that, I mean, I was saying to Trevor earlier on that I really, you know, for being a Scottish crime or thriller writer, I really am not very well read in Scottish crime or thrillers. And part of the reason for that is that I'm totally squeamish. And I started a Val McDermott and I thought, I can't. I'm sorry, Val, I can't read it. I started Stuart McBride, couldn't continue. Deborah Masson, Hold Your Tongue. I just couldn't. I'm so squeamish.
Like Denise Minor, have you not read Denise?
No, I keep hearing.
Oh yeah, you should read Denise.
I've heard so much about her amazing voice, but there's not sort of violence. That's good. That's good.
Well,
and I know
it's not too violent.
You read End of the Wasp Season is fine, I think, from what I remember. I don't think that's too bad.
No, and I think it is a cliche, but I think also, you know, even like Val McDermott, you know, I've you know, she's an immense number of books, and I know that some of her books, you know, don't have that same level of violence. I think I was just unlucky in that I picked an especially disturbing one. But I think, you know, even though I've not sort of immersed myself in the crime world, I think within Scotland, you know, since I was really, really wee, I have been aware of all these names. You know, they're so respected and so spoken about, and you know, everyone knows Ian Rankin and Val McDermott, and you know, further back, you know, Robert Louis Stevenson is my absolute favourite writer. I noticed a few people in the chat talking about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and you know, it's just, you know, the beginning of all the good versus evil stories, and what, you know, even though they're you know, back in the past, you've got Conan Doyle as well, obviously Edinburgh born. With the detective Sherlock Holmes, this detective tradition that we have very much in Scotland. But I think it's just that constant awareness of the crime scene in Scotland. It's always just always been there, whether or not you actually read them to any great extent. They're so important, and so you know, the bloody Scotland Festival is easily the, you know, well, you've got the Edinburgh Festival obviously as well, but you know, it's so well attended, and again, it's the sort of highlight of the readers and writers diary, I think, in terms of festivals. So it's such a strong tradition. I'm not sure where I fit into that tradition, I have to say, because you won't find anyone getting their fingernails ripped out in my books. never going to happen.
No, either.
So you don't need to worry, but it's fascinating to see this influence. Now, I'm very aware, actually, as I'm chatting, that the time is ticking on. So we should maybe turn to the questions. We've got a few questions already in the box, but remember, if you do want to ask individual questions to any of the writers or questions to all of us, then you can, now is your moment. We'll have sort of 15 minutes or so. We've got
Emma, can I be really cheeky and ask Sharon a quick question, just for me?
Of course, on you go.
All right.
I know there are so many Irish writers that get talked about these days, and the one name I never hear mentioned at all is Colin Bateman, who I really like. And
Colin was really our first crime writer here, you know, coming on from the Troubles thrillers. So funny, so sardonic, and literally shows how ridiculous this place is at times.
Yeah.
But yeah, he does get overlooked at the minute. But I think that's going to change. I think that, you know, me sort of studying the genre of Northern Irish crime fiction, we can see we owe Colin Bateman a lot, you know.
Right. I'm delighted, because it's always amazed me that you never hear his name mentioned at all.
I know, so funny. But I think he's screenwriting a lot now, so maybe that's the direction, I think so. But yeah, he does pop up. There was something I wrote recently in the Irish Times, and I left Colin's name out. And I was mortified. I left him and Anthony Quinn out, and somebody had put something about it on Facebook, and Colin wrote under it and something along, only one thing worse than being talked about.
Oh, bless.
Oh no.
Funny guy, I think.
He is very funny, very
Oh, good.
witty, and just that, being able to sort of show the ridiculousness with some of these sort of psychopaths that were running around Belfast, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
That's great. And in the chat, you know, someone has mentioned or comparing me to Christopher Brookmeyer. I mean, that is one Scottish crime writer that I have managed to write, and, you know, fantastic writer. I mean, I read that kind of the first one, Quite Ugly One Morning. When I read that, I kind of thought, wow, I didn't know books could be like this. You know, almost it was a totally new type of book for me when I read that back when I was at university. Yeah, so it's great. You have within all these different traditions, you have these, you know, this the hard gritty, and then you have people who do manage to have this humour as well, which is fantastic. So looking to the questions from viewers, Alan Lear says, does the panel think there's a lot of readership overlap between whodunits and procedurals, or do the readers want fundamentally different things? Who would like to answer that?
Can I take that? Yeah, there is a great overlap, and I think what's happening is that we're moving away from just the whodunit to more psychological insight as to why they've done it. You know, and that's sort of the cozy mysteries are sort of coming together with psychological crime fiction. So the likes of Ruth Ware, you know, taking basically the turn of the screw, a Gothic story, and bringing it up to date with the turn of the key. So we're getting things like that as real hybrid working, you know, and look at Louise as well, working within speculative fiction and making it a crime novel. I just love all of that. And I think we don't have to stay in our own lane. I think we can sort of veer over and back again and use what works for the story. It's not about necessarily staying true to the genre traditions. It's using those sort of tropes and guides to sort of break them or to create something new. So I'm all for it. Yeah.
That's brilliant. What about you, Victoria? Oh, sorry, Olivia.
No, go ahead. That's all right, Victoria.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Sharon was saying, and the Gothic element is quite big as well, and is rising up quite a lot. So you've got people like Sarah Ward, who is writing as Sarah Rhiannon Ward and writing The Quickening, and it's crime fiction, but it's taking it back to the kind of turn of the screw sort of idea of, is there something else going on here? So can you add that supernatural element in as well? So yeah, I think there is a huge amount of overlap now, and I think that maybe publishers are enjoying the sort of cross-genre stuff a little bit more. So, you know, I have a lot of Gothic stuff, and, you know, the big old country house, and it's crumbling. There's something creaking around in the floor. There's a piano playing at night. All that jazz. I love all that. And it is quite part of the tradition, you know, it's there. And then, you know, all of a sudden there's a great big gruesome bloody crime in the middle of it. And people are, oh my God, this shouldn't be in the middle of your book. But actually, I think it could be, you know. And then the comedy aspect you were talking about, I think most crime fiction has quite a dark comedic element at some point, because otherwise it's relentless. And nobody wants to read something that is utterly... you know, I remember a friend from Chambers, when, you know, I was doing my previous job, she said it's like sticking your head in a sewer for 24 hours. Nobody wants that particular feeling. There has to be that bit where you come up for air, you laugh at something you definitely should not be laughing at. And it's part of crime fiction now, isn't it? That all of the genres are kind of melding into one.
Mm-hmm. I think, yeah, with what I was going to say about the whodunits, and absolutely agree with that. I love exactly what you're saying, Sharon and Victoria, that there's, you know, what you might find in a crime novel nowadays is just, you know, it can go anywhere, which is just wonderful. With regards to readership, whether there's an overlap between whodunits and procedurals, I think yes, there is, obviously, because all police procedurals usually begin with a crime at the centre, and that's the driving force throughout the narrative, that you're usually trying to find out who done it. So with regards to it, does the procedural fit into that classic shape? It has, and it always does. But I think maybe the readership coming to police procedurals perceive them as perhaps being filled with technical language or technical things that they might not understand, and most modern police procedurals are not like that at all now. They are much more driven on victim side and filling out the victim's life and trying to put together the mystery of that crime. So I think there's more a shift of what those subgenres look like. And now when we talk about the classic whodunit, the big house with the multiple characters inside that we are seeing a lot of now again, that's kind of changed, because instead of what you'd normally have, or what you used to have historically, would be the shape of a character, an investigator at the top, that the reader would see things through their eyes and put things together. And now I think over the last few years, certainly, we've seen more where you get multi or polynarrative novels, where you have multiple narrators who have all witnessed the same crime. Someone dies and the reader is the sole detective. They listen to the story via each of these characters and then put together the solution for who done it. So I think there's been shifts in both directions, for it's not just the readership coming in going, oh, I anticipate when I pick up a whodunit it's going to have this shape. There's actually been a slight change in what we think of now when we talk about whodunit. When we talk about whodunit over the last few years, it's multi characters. You as reader are putting together the mystery to work out. Whether I think historically you would have multi characters, you via a detective, which we would now probably call police procedural, discover who has done it. So I think there's small shifts in what's happened to the genre over the last few years anyway. From my perspective, someone's probably going to come in and go, oh, that's totally not true.
It sounds good to me. And one of the books that's selling loads at the moment is The Dinner Guest, which is a sort of I haven't read it yet, but I think that's the same kind of idea, isn't it? It's 4 people or 5 people at dinner. One of them dies.
I haven't read that yet, Emma. Is there a detective at the centre?
I'm not.
No, I think it's. No, I think it's just going to be all the people.
So now I think now people would be marketing that as, here's a whodunit. Whether years ago we would go, a whodunit is like your Agatha Christie with your detective at the centre, or some form of detective. So I think. We've gone.
Although I have to say, a lot of it, they are classified as having the classic genre tropes, but actually every single time they break it, and that's why those are such big novels. So for instance, a book where everybody dies and there is no detective and there is no good guy, and probably shouldn't name that because that's probably going to be very bad, but and it's quite hard to talk about them without the spoilers. But also the one where the narrator did it, and you all the way along, you're just carrying on all the way through, and you're there, oh, okay, yeah. So I think they have those tropes have been done and they've been broken, but I think nowadays people are sort of rediscovering them quite a lot. That I love the fact that you've got somebody who's saying, I'm not going to explain to you why the main character will inhabit the body of the possible murderer on day 2, and that's not going to happen. I'm just going to put that there, and so you can have that huge surrealist angle as well.
I've read Last House on Needless Street. Has anybody read that? Because it's a horror novel, but it starts off with the trope of the little lost girl, and it's the anniversary of her disappearance, and it literally takes you on a ride that totally blows your mind, and has narration from a cat called Olivia,
Nice.
which is like your cat Victoria in the background
I
there.
have removed my cat because it was making me look slightly too witchy.
Never. But do you not think as well that readers are so much more sophisticated now?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that is down to crime drama on television. We're all sitting there and judge and jury, and we're saying whether or not a scene works, or, you know, we know what to look for as readers now. So I think a lot of reader expectation has to be met by the reader or the writer. And then publishers are sort of slapping on every book, you know, the twist you won't see coming, almost setting us up for failure because you spend the whole time reading, anticipating, and this glee maybe isn't actually fulfilled. So I just think, you know, yeah, crime writers or crime readers are the most intelligent readers because they know how to work it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely. No, it's a really good point. We'll move. Is anyone else getting anything else to add to that particular question? I mean, it's totally fascinating what you've all said. We'll move on to another question. Does the panel think that crime fiction is a good medium for cultural exchange, since crime itself is universal? I mean, we've probably kind of covered, certainly in terms of the Irish story. Anyone get anything they would like to add? Maybe
there's there's certainly a big crossover with Northern crime and Scandi noir, Icelandic noir. And I'm not sure whether it's the weather or the fact that it's maybe literally a bit darker.
It's the jumpers.
In those places. I really don't know what it is, but there's a real connection, I think, between the Scandi noir, the Icelandic noir, and whatever we call this Northern noir. I mean, I think it's no coincidence. My first two foreign deals for The Man on the Street were Norway and Sweden. It was seemed almost inevitable when they were the ones that popped up, because there's somehow a fit. I think maybe it's the Vikings, because the Vikings, you know, took over the Northeast pretty much for a while. So we're all the same, really.
The cold. It's the cold.
The cold.
I think it's the cold.
Cold.
You get cold. You don't get cold in Iceland, I don't think.
Cold with a D, and the ice and the
cold.
jumpers and the fucking relentless rain. Why do you think I came south?
I thought you were from Yorkshire, man. What?
Exactly.
I'm in Barcelona. I think I've got the worst. And Penny Batchelor's asking if we ever feel constrained by our genres. Again, I think that's something that we've kind of touched on in this last stretch of the conversation. But Trevor is going to add something.
Emma, no, I was actually just going to say, I don't know if you saw it, but there was a question in the actual chat.
Oh, no, I didn't.
Asking who everybody's favourite detective/investigator was.
Oh, I didn't see that. Oh, let's.
Which seemed like a fun way to end the discussion, I thought.
Well, let's go for it. I think the other question, the question about do we feel constrained, I think we've kind of covered that. Thank you very much, Penny, but I think we covered that as part of the general discussion. So yeah, let's.
Jess Ghost. I'd love to know who each panelist's favourite fictional detective, amateur or professional, is.
Well, mine is from TV, so mine would be Murder, She Wrote, and it's Jessica Fletcher.
Good one. It's
just stolen Victoria's there, I think.
I know, I got in there quick before you could say it. And I remember my mum using as a punishment I was watching an episode of Murder, She Wrote, and I'd done something wrong, which was normal for me. And she switched it off, and I didn't find out who the murderer was. And I was incensed. So yeah, love Jessica Fletcher. She's amazing.
I'm going to go for Clarice Starling, just because I don't know. There's just something, in fact, the fact that she's a woman, and I know it's not a series detective, but I think because she's a woman and she, you know, obviously I've read the book because it's amazing, but as well as the movie, she just seems so, I don't know, capable in a man's world when I remember when I first saw it, which was probably way too young. Yeah, she has my vote.
I think I would go for the Tana French Dublin Murder Squad, and she has a different detective every time. They're my absolute masterclass in how to do it. And if I'm going to go for a TV one, it's going to be Scooby-Doo. I'm there with Shaggy.
I love Scooby-Doo.
Yeah.
Sharon, we're on the same page. Broken Harbour is one of my favourite crime books of all time.
Oh,
Definitely mine
Faithful
too.
Place is
Yeah.
mine. I just love that book so much. Faithful Place.
Good.
Yeah, she's amazing, Tana.
Fabulous.
Amazing. Oh, is it me? Is it my turn?
Go for it.
Yeah.
I think Louise probably heard me give a completely different answer to the same question the last time we did a panel. I know I should stick to Northern Noir, and I do like Joe Knox's Aidan Watts is a fantastic lead character. But I'm going to go for Dominic Nolan's character, Abigail.
Oh yes, Boone. Yeah.
Abigail Boone.
He's great.
Dominic Nolan's written 2 books featuring Abigail Boone, who's right from the start is suffering total amnesia and has no recollection of her past, her husband, her kids, or anything, and tries to pull her life together whilst trying to work out who the hell threw her off a balcony in the first place and what it was all about. And they're breathtakingly brilliant books.
He's such a good writer. Definitely.
Absolutely astonishing, and doesn't get anywhere near the credit he should. So read Dominic Nolan's books, because I really want him to write a 3rd, and I'm not sure he's going to. So go and buy them quick.
Yeah.
What about you, Victoria?
Well, it's not going to be a surprise, is it?
Is it Marple or Poirot though?
Oh, I'm going to have to go with Poirot.
Oh.
Because
Love Poirot.
you know, he's just quintessential, and it's all, you know, he is all just about the little grey cells and the little things you see. But actually, you know, he's just a puppet being operated by Agatha Christie the whole time, and you're just being moved around all the time, and you're looking over here, and he's like a magician, you know, you're looking over here, and all of the time it's just right here, and you don't realize it, and you know how many detectives have ever been on a train and everybody's done it. Just the best denouement there's ever been. And you know, we've all watched the movie, we all, you know, read the book when we were really young. You just sat there and went, oh my god, I did not see that coming at all. And I know a lot of other detectives are a bit more rounded, and their characters come to the fore more, but what he actually does is provide you with the ability to just be in the book with them and just think, I am clever enough to just about do this, just about, but not quite. I'm just not clever enough. Just not clever enough to have gone, oh shit, it was you.
Brilliant. Do you know, that's the only Agatha Christie book that I have read, I have to say, and I only read it a couple of years ago. I have this funny thing where I don't really read series of books. I don't watch series of TV. I like one-offs. I'm very fickle. It's not that, you know, I like reading the same writer, but I don't necessarily follow a series with a detective around it. But I have to say, the one who stuck in my mind, and I'm not just saying this, is Jimmy, who's the creation of Trevor. It's the only series I've ever actually read and wanted to continue reading. And it's just brilliant. If you haven't read Trevor's books, they're fantastic, and they feature a dog called Dog, which is the best, the best, one of many great aspects of the book, but just really fantastic. And I used to live in Newcastle as well, so I've got a real soft spot for the north, and really just brilliant. Absolutely loved.
I did not plant that question deliberately.
It's another $5, Trevor.
That was making lots of money.
It's getting passed around, that $5. Great. Well, I think, you know, we've had all the questions. We're at 8:20 now. I have to say, I have learned loads about the crime traditions of the UK and Ireland tonight. It's been really, really fascinating hearing all, you know, about these newer types of noir, and you know, and looking back to the history as well, how the influences that has had on all of us. So thank you so much for all your insights and also your book recommendations. I've been noting down dozens of names as we go along, so I will soon be an expert on the crime traditions. Thank you so much to all the viewers as well. We had almost 30 people tuning in to watch us, so thank you, and I hope all of you have enjoyed it. If the panelists, if you want to hold up your book as well before, as we say goodbye, we can remind everyone who we are, and thank you so much for coming. And hope to see you again at another Stay at Home Fest event. So thank you very much and good night.